which is perhaps a wonderful segue for you, as I just realised as we move on to talk about the Bayern Munich game, unless you have anything else to say about Leverkusen.
No, I just want to say that we are doing a bonus show this week previewing Bayern against Bayer. This is a really good way to point that out. So if you're not a subscriber yet, that preview is going to be a complete show on that game, because I think it is going to be fascinating. And, Bayern Munich had a really good start to the season. They continued to just tear teams apart, right? They followed up their 9-2 win over Dinamo Zagreb with a 5-0 win over Werder Bremen. There's a lot of great things that I want to talk about on this match. And I also want to spend some time on Jamal Musiala and Michael Olise, who I think I'm going to write my newsletter on him this week, because I think he has been possibly the best signing in Europe at this stage of the season. That 53 million euro deal might turn out to be an absolute steal. But before we talk about all of Bayern's amazing attacking talent, there's one number that stood out to me in this Werder Bremen game, and that is 0.00. That was Werder Bremen's XG in this game. I don't think I've ever seen that, ever. I mean, but the fact that Bayern scored 5 goals is outstanding. But the fact that this defensive lineup, this is also, we have talked about Werder Bremen, how poorly we both think they have done in the transfer window. And they might be a team in trouble this season as well. But that Kim and Upamecano held Werder Bremen to an XG of 0.00, and doing so with backup goalkeeper Sven Ulreich as well. I think there's something worth mentioning here, Stefan.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. They absolutely annihilated Werder Bremen, and that in itself is probably quite an interesting story for Bremen, who I'm sure we'll talk about, maybe on the previous show ahead of next match day, because there's a lot to kind of break down there, in the sense that we actually talked about it a few weeks ago, and one of our YouTube listeners left a good comment actually saying, I'm really glad someone's talking about this in English, because he's like, as a Bremen fan, it just feels to me like we just have absolutely no ambition this season. They spent basically no money in the transfer window, did very little to kind of shake things up in that squad. And they went into this game against Bayern, and it seems as though they just had no interest in even competing against it. They were treading water, hoping to get a game over and done with as quickly as possible.
0 shots on goal and 0 shots on target, obviously, but that tells the full story.
Yeah, and the first goal was basically like them trying to pass the ball out of their own defence. Didn't work out. Bayern take the ball, score very easily. It's also worth noting that Bayern scored 5 goals here. They hit the crossbar twice, by my count. Maybe it was more than that. Maybe they had the woodwork more than that. But, obviously Michael Olise scores an outstanding goal to kick things off. Remarkable but skill to score, I think, to set up the third goal, I think it was. Maybe the second one, and then of course the third one, I think, I'm probably getting my order wrong here, was when he kind of dribbled into the box. Or no, when Harry Kane played the 1-2 with him, and then he cut it back for Harry Kane. It looked like a training exercise. It looked like senior team senior team against under 19s or something. But I think the interesting thing to work, it's all well and good saying, Bayern beat a rubbish Werder Bremen team, and we talked about this last week in the sense that, I think after that Champions League annihilation of Dinamo Zagreb, saying, Bayern just haven't really come up against a decent test yet. And I would probably add this game to that kind of growing list of minnows that they have thumped. But there was something interesting about this performance, and it was that there is a belief in this team that I don't think we really got last season under Thomas Tuchel. I don't really think we got under Nagelsmann all that much. And they just look like they're having fun. And I think that's the key thing. Harry Kane undoubtedly has a great chemistry with Olise. He has a great chemistry with Thomas Muller. He scores his goal. He runs to the sideline and does his celebration with Thomas Muller, which is now beginning to kind of resemble the kind of Cristiano Ronaldo, Sue celebration, in the way that everyone kind of does it now. And it looks like everyone kind of knows how to play alongside one another. Even Konrad Laimer, though, had a fantastic game. Brings so much kind of impetus and charge to that midfield, which is often lacking, to be honest with you. So yeah, I mean, I don't think we can read too much into the result because Werder Bremen was so poor, much like the Zagreb performance or the one in the Bundesliga before that. But there's a chemistry building there. Musiala, outstanding form. Ulisse,
Yeah.
outstanding form. Harry Kane, outstanding form. And much like we maybe talked about
Pavlovic.
Pavlovic as well. Sorry, of course,
So
yeah. So
good. Yeah.
it's a good time. I mean, I guess I just don't want to be too gloomy on it. I don't want to say, well, they haven't played anyone good yet, so it could happen to them like it did with Dortmund against Stuttgart. But they played like the Harlem Globetrotters against Werder Bremen, and I'm sure Bayern Munich fans loved watching it.
I do think, they haven't been tested yet. The one test that they had was the Wolfsburg game, and there were moments where it looked like they could fall apart, right? So that performance might still very well come, and that is when it becomes a real test for Vincent Kompany and this team and the chemistry that they're undoubtedly building. Is how do they going to respond to the first bit of crisis, right? We all know what Munich is, what happens in Munich when they lose one game, right? Everything just goes sideways, and especially this time of the year. Well, thankfully they already had their Oktoberfest shoot, so it's if they lose now, we won't get these very incriminating Oktoberfest photos at this point because they went after this 5-0 win and 9-2 win. They timed it really well this year, right? There's lots of photos of a happy Harry Kane and Alphonso Davies with Jamal Musiala, and then the social media team does these tricks with like where they do the beer deckle challenge and all that sort of stuff, and they did it all in a time when there was a really good mood. Oktoberfest is on for another 2 weeks almost, right? Something goes wrong now, it will be still Oktoberfest time, but the photos are done, so they're good. They shipped around that little iceberg right there and avoided a collision. But I do think what is really outstanding right now is the mood. The players are all seem in a really good mood, and as you mentioned, that the chemistry is very much there. And it is a few things that really stand out too to me is the way Musiala and Pavlovic harmonize on the midfield. It bodes well for Bayern, but also the German national team, right? Because they seem to be really creating a really good axis there. And then also the way Michael Olise fixed a lot of Bayern Munich's attacking issues. He makes this team, even Serge Gnabry looks like a world-class player again. You know what I mean? Like it just makes it all more rounded. He really gives them a lot more depth and creativity in an area where they had a lot of straight-up wingers, but he just seems to add a lot of other parts to Bayern Munich's attacking setup that just make it more whole. And I think that is a really worrying proposition for opponents because he and this is also remarkable. He comes in, he has a great connection with Musiala right away. He has a great connection with Harry Kane. Of course, it helps that he does play for France, but he has that strong English connection, right? So like there is that chemistry there right away. And I think that was more than anything else, and it kind of flew under the radar, I think, for many, but rather than this holding six, Palhinha, who they ended up signing and hasn't really played much of a role because Pavlovic has been so outstanding, it really seems like it was Olise who has been the missing puzzle piece, which is actually a really fascinating story for me. But then I also wonder, and this is a debate I think that we're going to have sooner rather than later, how do you even put Leroy Sané back into this team? Because he doesn't offer any of this multidimensional attacking talent that Olise has. He's a straight up winger. Do you put him on the left? But what do you do then with Serge Gnabry, who gives you a little bit more depth and has that ability to almost play like a second striker, right? Kingsley Coman, despite all the transfer rumors, he's been playing and he's been playing well, right? It's not the same as Leon Goretzka, who seems to be ostracized from the squad altogether. It's a really fascinating story that Olise might be the player that can finally replace Leroy Sané, but the politics around that are going to be, I think, extremely complicated.
Yeah, it is fascinating because as far as I can tell, Kompany seems quite settled in having Harry Kane, obviously, as his number 9, Musiala right behind him at number 10, and then Olise on the right-hand side, where he obviously played for Crystal Palace for a number of years. But that left wing role, it seems to be completely up for grabs, and it seems to be this kind of rotating cast. You know, it was Coleman in this game, but we've seen Serge Gnabry starting there. And the two of them have kind of shared that role because obviously Leroy Sané hasn't really got started yet this season. But you would suspect that once Sané is now back, he did come on in this game. If that is where he would be, and it's almost like Kompany is quite settled with those three players, and then these three backup players will have to kind of share that left wing role to some extent. And that might work quite well for some of them. I do kind of think that, you know, the fascinating thing with Serge Gnabry in particular at Bayern Munich is that he has always proved to be a great squad player. He's always an outstanding kind of supporting cast. He's a supporting actor and a Hollywood play. He's one of the best. You know, if Bayern Munich was FC Hollywood, as we like to call them, Serge Gnabry would be the actor going up for supporting role in the Oscars every year, and he'd be very well deserving of it. But whenever he's tried to become the leading man or the leading actor in that role, is when he's kind of came up short, because he's simply not a Harry Kane. He's not a Musiala. He's not a Lewandowski. He's a player who supports those players. And you can almost see with Olise coming in here and kind of taking some of the limelight that Gnabry's actually kind of benefiting from that, because the opposing teams are obviously so occupied with Harry Kane, with Musiala, with Olise, that Gnabry actually almost shines outside of the limelight. And I would actually say Coleman does as well too. Coleman at his best has always been a functional squad player. As you said, there's what's that hockey term that you used to describe him last season?
A two-way player. Two-way player, yeah.
Yeah, he's a fantastic kind of utility player, if you will, as well. So both of those players kind of really benefit, I think, from not being the key men. And you can see them kind of, if they're happy to be that, I know both of them have had epic kind of contract disputes with Bayern in recent years about payments and why they think they should be paid like key players, and Bayern eventually agreed to pay them the money that they wanted to be paid. But whether they're happy taking that money but not being the key man, I guess we'll have to wait and see. The other one is Leroy Sané, though. I think he's a different type of player entirely. I think he's the kind of guy who wants to be the main man. I think he wants to play as a number 10. I think last season we saw Tuchel trying to find some way to play him and Musiala alongside one another, where Musiala eventually kind of got pushed out to that left-hand side role and Sané played through the middle. And we saw him playing quite well with Harry Kane. They formed a really good bond, and I think it's to Harry Kane's immense credit that he's got 5 or 6 of these players, and just about every one of them does not struggle at all to form very quick bonds with him. And you can even add obviously Thomas Müller to that as well. But the issue is, as you said, how does Leroy Sané fit back into this team? You can play him off the right, but he then drifts inside, and that means he plays a very different role to Michael Olise, which is maybe not what Vincent Kompany wants. Maybe he wants his right winger to play on the wing like Olise has done. He could play through the middle, but then he's stepping on Musiala's toes, and then you can put him out left, where I actually don't think he's particularly useful. So, yeah. Look, it's a long season. Players get injured, and Bayern do need top-class players in every position. So I suspect Sané will pick up game time. It just depends whether he's willing to be a bench player, he's willing to be a backup player, like Gnabry and Coman. And I guess we'll have to wait and see, because as you said, they haven't had a big test yet. But let me just tell you the next 5 games. I'm sure you've got it in front of you, Manny, already. But for the listeners who maybe are driving home from work or something, they've got Bayern Munich away. They've got Bayern Munich at home this weekend. Then straight after it, they've got the Champions League against Aston Villa, a very good Aston Villa team. They then play Eintracht Frankfurt away, who have been very good. Were very good against Gladbach at the weekend.
And
there.
Beating Bayern.
Yes.
There's that
And then they've
well.
got, and then if that wasn't bad enough, they then play Stuttgart, who just broke down how they dismantled Dortmund without breaking a sweat. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they then had to go to the Nou Camp to play Hansi Flick's Barcelona, who've actually had a good start to the season as well. So that's 5 more or less cup finals for Bayern after playing 5 friendlies. They've then got 5 cup finals. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how they work in that game, in those games.
I'm not going to be funny here, but I actually think the 2 Champions League games are actually easier ones for them.
Listen. Don't take Aston Villa lightly, because they did really well to get to the top 4 last season in the Premier League. They're already in it this season. And
But they are this sort of Premier League team, Bayern and smashes. Like,
yeah,
we've seen this over and over again. Like they're this sort of, Bayern love playing Premier League teams. Like we've seen that throughout the history. Those are the teams that even an excellent Arsenal side, they dispatched in the end quite easily. So yeah, you're right. Aston Villa is an excellent team, but I think that in Barcelona, I mean, they just lost the starting goalkeeper, right? And I don't trust that Hansi Flick will have a big grasp of what's going on in Barcelona overall. So this is a situation that can blow up at any moment. And so I do think those are challenging games, but I look at that Leverkusen or the Frankfurt or the Stuttgart games, that just seems harder, right? Especially because there's history there too. Stuttgart beat Bayern Munich just on the eve of the Real Madrid game last year, right, to take that second place eventually in the Bundesliga. And then in Frankfurt has always been a place where things went sideways for Bayern. And when things went sideways in a season for Bayern Munich, it's because usually Frankfurt beat them 5-0. Right, that happened last year, and then happened in that year where Kovac got fired. Having said that, it's also, Bayern also have the history of remembering those kind of results and then really giving it back. So this can also go the other way. So if you Frankfurt and Stuttgart, you might want to prepare yourself for if Bayern Munich, let's say Bayern Munich go and beat Leverkusen, and then they go and smash Aston Villa. I think I'd be really worried if it was Frankfurt at that stage.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. That's the thing. We're kind of looking forward to seeing what happens, because Bayern Munich are capable of winning those 5 games, but they're also capable of losing those 5 games. I'm not going to say they're going to lose all 5, but any one of those 5
100%.
teams, I think at this point, could beat Bayern Munich, and we just haven't seen them tested defensively, really. To be perfectly honest with you, they still lost 2 goals against Dinamo Zagreb. Wolfsburg for about 30 minutes. Put in an effort against Bayern and managed to score 2 goals from it. Holstein Kiel even scored a goal. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be fascinating, and I can't wait for the Leverkusen game because exactly that. But I think all these games will show us the full extent of how much work Vincent Kompany has done at Bayern this season.
And Bayern had a very strong start last year too, and they did also beat Werder Bremen. I think it was 4-1 or 4-2. And Harry Kane scored a hat-trick there, right? And look, it's still really early. And I think the really important part, and I think this is what you really pointing out here too, is they haven't been tested yet. And these next 5 games will be tests. Every single one of them will have very unique challenges. Going to England and play a Premier League team is going to be an interesting challenge, right? Then playing 3 Bundesliga teams that are all very good, had very good starts to the season as well, and all play in setups that I don't think suit Bayern very well. I think this is the other very important part here, is how do they respond to adversity. I think both on the field in a game when they get challenged, but also afterwards if they do lose one of those games, because we do know how volatile the situation can be at the Säbener Straße, and how quick the media then jumps on it to dissect all the problems, right? Right now, everything is great. Everything is fantastic. And the entire team gets praise all the time. But the moment it doesn't, there's 4 major newspapers in Munich. We already mentioned one on the podcast with hundreds of thousands of readers. And that doesn't even include Bild. That's a newspaper on top of that, right? They're not based in Munich. Actually, they're based in Hamburg. So, what I'm saying is, when blood is in the water, those sharks will come circling very quickly. And we'll have to see if Bayern can fight off those sharks when they are in the water. And I think that is going to be a really interesting storyline. And I think right now, I think fans and everyone can be very happy. So we'll see how the next few matches go.